Welcome to this webinar. We will start in a couple of minutes. Welcome everybody. If you please raise your hand, then I can see you're in. It's in a small pictogram on the right of your screen. Yes, Liana, I see it. I will. Yes, Suzanne, I see you. Thank you. Yes, Cindy, I see you. Thank you. Eva Maria, I see you. Thank you. Mathieu, thank you. Michiel, it's on the right of your screen. You can raise your hand. Welcome everybody to this webinar. You can raise your hand if you're in. Hello, Margaret. Nice to have you here. Dear Corinne, nice to have you here. Ace, thank you, you're here. Michiel, it's working, thank you. We will start in a couple of minutes. There's still arriving attendees. Jose, nice to have you here. Jose, hello, nice to have you here. You can raise your hand, it's on the right of your screen. If you have questions, you can type it. Welcome to you all. We will start in about a minute. Thank you for being here. Welcome everybody. You're here in the webinar. From Euro Guidance. We're about to start. I will tell you something about Euro Guidance, and then we present you three speakers. It's just watching and listening. You can ask questions by using the chat. We will give you some time after each presentation, and then we will speak the question out loud. Your microphone is automatically switched off. When you have problems with hearing me, please use the chat. This is the program for this hour we provided. We are happy to have you here. My name is Jetske Tuinstra. I work partly for your guidance, and we are very pleased to present you the second webinar of 2018. And we hope to inspire you or making links to similar developments. And please, you can always send your question during the webinar, but it will be answered after each presentation. And of course, if you have questions left after we finished with the presentations and the whole webinar, you can also use this email address to ask questions afterwards. For now, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, Mary Quirk and Connor McGugan. This takes a minute. I will switch the screen to them, and they are be live in our webinar from Ireland. Just a moment, please. Here, Connor, I see you. Hi there in Ireland. Good morning. Is your screen ready for the presentation? Is it on view modus? Because we can see you, but I can't see your screen is ready. Your PowerPoint presentation. Do you hear me?
Yes, Mary has the PowerPoint presentation on her screen.
Ah, okay. Sorry for this interruption. Just a moment, please. I'm sorry for everyone. Mary is not here in yet, so we will change the order of presentations, and we will start with Corinne Coppens. Just 1 minute, please. Just one moment, please.
Hello, I might have to hang up now if this crowd.
Hi, Mary. Sorry for all to hear this. I think Mary was not aware that she was already here.
Sorry, I was and my doorbell went. I am very apologetic.
Okay. Hi, Mary. Nice to have you here. We can see your screen now.
Okay.
Can you switch over to the presentation?
Okay, now I can't see my screen, so apologies. Oh yes, I can see now. Have you started? Sorry now.
Ik zet daar even... Ja, ik kan haar nu niet... Okay, Mary, we can see you. We can see your presentation. Thank you for having you here. Please start your presentation. Everybody is in and is listening and is very curious about what you have to say.
Okay,
So
thank you.
the word is for you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I'm going to cover a few points today with what I'm learning about career guidance and including students with disabilities in the career guidance process. And just to say a little bit about myself briefly, I am a qualified career guidance counsellor and I have worked with a variety of people, not just students in second level, but I've also worked with adults and I have worked with students with disabilities and specific learning difficulties. Much of my career with respect to career guidance has been working with people who found themselves outside of, I suppose, normal learning or normal educational environments. Normal being what we understand to be where people are progressing through primary, second level and on to higher education. I'm currently doing my research in this area with Professor Conor McGuckin, who I think is also listening. And while I have some questions, I also hopefully have some learning about what I'm doing at the moment. So what I'm going to cover today is where I'm going to look at the guidance experience and the challenges that it presents for us when we're trying to engage with maybe those students that are a little bit outside of the margins, and also the challenges to consider the challenges it might present for those students with a disability, and to explore how this engagement between us and these students with a disability can become more of an emphasis part of the guidance process and can benefit all students. Now, if I speak a little bit quickly, please do feel free to slow me down. I apologise in advance. So why do I call these 10 commandments?
I think that's a good idea to slow down a little bit for the people who are not native speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I have put some of my learning into commandments because it's just to basically say if we could stop and take time to consider some of the points that I'm about to make. We are all very well aware, those of us that are working in education and guidance or engaging students with disabilities, that there is a lot of changes afoot and a lot of changes out there, and it's making a lot of demands on us and how we engage with these students. So this is a slide that I've shown, which is the 10 commandments as I see them, or 10 areas that I want to explore with you this morning. And I'm going to proceed through each one. So we can come back and look at the whole lot together in the end. The first challenge, I suppose, about guidance in and of itself, I found when I started my research, is to stand back and ask ourselves, what is it? Not so much what we believe it to be, but also what others believe it to be. What is contemporary guidance today? And when I start to explore the definitions of guidance that are out there are very many different understandings. There are many different understandings within the profession. We have guidance counselling in Ireland. We have careers teachers. We have career guidance in the UK. There is a lot of definitions and a lot of, I suppose, words put out there. But in any case, what many people do believe it to mean is that they are looking at people realising their potential and transitioning on to the next level of education or on into the world of work. And it's the process that enables that to happen. Outside of ourselves that are engaged in the guidance process, when you ask people on the street, maybe the parents, the students themselves, what do they understand career guidance to be? There was research carried out in Ireland in 2007, and there was quite a significant number found that they did not know what career guidance was. 50% knew a little, 44% said they knew nothing. And I suppose this led me to think, well, what would our clients say if we were to ask them today, what is guidance? And yet there's a big pressure put on career guidance people also maybe to answer an awful lot of dilemmas or questions or to navigate their way through a system. And sometimes it is unreasonable for one counsellor to cater for all the needs of an individual that might be facing a lot of challenges. Another thing, I suppose, that has crept into the career guidance process is the whole area of testing and assessment. And there are many other professionals that also use testing and assessment and possibly engage in career coaching or career advice. And it can be found, or it can be argued, that assessment can put people into boxes. It can label people and suggest that this is what you're good at and this is only what you could consider doing. So I'm going to look at that a little bit more on another slide. But in essence, the role of the guidance counsellor is to engage in personal, educational and vocational counselling. That is what we would see it in Ireland. And it is looking at engaging in that process at particular stages over somebody's lifespan when you consider lifelong guidance and lifelong learning. From the point of view of Europe, it is looking at promoting personal, social, education and career development of students, or I would argue learners, because you're considering lifelong learning and the more adult and mature student that's re-engaging possibly in education or reconsidering what they're doing. But in any case, it is about helping all citizens to reach their full potential and to contribute to the development of a better society. So I suppose when we think about guidance and career guidance with that focus or through that lens, what we need to stop and think about is guidance based on a medical model or a social model? Now, I know another speaker is also going to speak to the models of disability, but in relation to career guidance, it originated in the 1950s in the States. It was very much about vocational training and accessing different types of vocations and work. And I suppose at the time, much of the clientele would have been male, would have been looking at particular types of work, and it was simpler in one way, while maybe not in another. But it was very much focused on setting people up for a career or a vocation for life. The medical model, which is a model of disability, would also seek to possibly label people set to diagnose and say, now, here's what, it is, I suppose, an area or is something that we can attribute to you, and now let's fix it. The social model of disability, the medical model of disability, was in and around the 1950s also, interestingly enough. And then what developed in the 1960s and 1970s was a social model of disability, where it was recognised that it wasn't the disability was compounding the person, but it was the environment that they were in was presenting with barriers. What is emerging now are many new models of disability, but one new model is the universal design for learning model. And that is a model that I find particularly interesting, because what it's saying is that we need to design whatever service, product or area, learning, curriculum, etc., that we are engaging ourselves in for the greatest population possible. So from the get-go, we need to design it so that it will include the most people, and that the add-ons or adaptations or special ways of doing things would become less so. And I just wondered if we look at guidance, considering that it was designed for a cohort that probably are very different to the cohort are engaging it today, if we applied universal design theory to career guidance and asked ourselves, what would it look like for the greatest population possible? Would we change it from what it is today? Or maybe we would not. Another area that is, I suppose, pushing these changes is when the unusual becomes more usual, the figures. I do know that certainly from the point of view of disability, the figures are rising. And there is a push on from Europe and nationally in many countries as well to ensure that social inclusion happens, to ensure that mainstreaming happens, that students with disabilities can access education, whether it's primary, secondary, further or higher education, to ensure that they will access employment and have a greater quality of life. But just to share with you some of the numbers, and I do understand that they're quite similar in Holland and other European countries, students with disabilities now represent 5.2% of the total student population across the higher education sector in Ireland. And that is interesting because it is rising year on year, and it is actually then demanding that there be changes on campus in the learning environment in order to accommodate those students. And on the slide that's in front of you, you'll see some of the, I suppose, interesting learning that we have from some of the data that we collect in AHEAD, which is available on the AHEAD website. A third consideration, and I might be moving a little quickly, but I'm aware of time, is the fact that there's also new ways, there's new policies, there's new legislation, there's new thinking, there's new laws. The UN Convention specifically mentions universal design, and the UN Convention for the people with disabilities, and it is about creating new opportunities, and it is impacting in all of our arenas in relation to equality legislation and promoting social inclusion, be it in areas of education and work. And I'm not going to go into things specifically, but just to highlight that that's there. Another new way of doing things, I suppose, or another thing that's causing us to stop and rethink how we do things is the role of technology. And if we just even stop for a moment and think of the webinar today, this morning, I'm sitting here in the Christmas rush in my sitting room. I'm sure you can see the mess behind me. But it means that I'm working differently. But it's also opening up opportunity for others in that they might think about what they might do and think that now, do you know, I couldn't have done that 15 years ago, but now I could. There's greater flexibility in work and learning. So what might have been seen as an accommodation for a person with a disability is possibly working for many other people, and is then asking or demanding that work be more flexible in its approaches. And this is also being seen in schools and colleges and courses in that there's new pedagogical approaches. There is talk about choice of assessment, for example, for students. There is different ways of engaging in teaching practice. Curriculum from the get-go is being designed for the greatest diversity of learners, particularly as lifelong learning takes hold, and we recognise that there's possibly more than one thing we want to engage over the course of our lifetimes. But this feeds back into guidance because it means that people are now making decisions in a different way about courses and learning and about their career paths. And what we might have once ruled out for somebody, it should not anymore be the case. We do not know, and I suppose it very much depends on the individual. Attitudes and assumptions are something, as I was engaging in reading, that certainly are quite prevalent, be it in teaching, the workplace, or sometimes even in guidance. There can be suggestions that students will invent a disability to work the system because it might make life easier. And I'm putting out some uncomfortable statements here, and some people will absolutely disagree with them, and that's fair enough. But it does maybe give us reason to stop and think about it for a moment. You know, are we guilty sometimes of thinking that somebody shouldn't do a course because they might fail, and that we don't want to set them up for failure? That maybe if they want to engage in a professional program, that they don't belong because it mightn't be what we would see or a teacher to be, or a doctor to be, or a nurse to be. So we need to be aware of our own assumptions all the time as we engage with a changing population. A fifth commandment is the new developments in the learning environment, basically in the classroom, and as people access the classroom. Some of these developments are in and around changing application procedures. And I would highlight here that some of the application procedures now invite students with disabilities to disclose, that is, to share with whoever they're going to learn or work with, that they have a disability, and they need to know how that disability is going to impact on their journey. There's changes in teaching and learning, which I have alluded to earlier on. Materials are available in alternative formats. I'm well aware of some colleges here in Ireland now that automatically record everything at this point for all of their students, because they found that while they were recording lectures for those students that had a text disability, that is, those students that possibly had dyslexia or were blind and visually impaired, that it made it much easier just to record all lectures from the get-go and make them available to all students, because it improved all students' learning. Physical learning environments are changing. Exam arrangements, as I mentioned earlier on, are changing. But the most interesting thing I find is that professional courses themselves are becoming more accessible. And what once would have been considered fitness to practice, that's FTP considerations, or health and safety considerations, are being reviewed all the time and becoming more inclusive. So some of the access, while the access routes are improving, they have really only improved, I suppose, in the last 20 years in Ireland. So it means that we are still engaging with people that might have had a different journey, but could be setting out to attain the same end goal as a cohort who are coming through a more inclusive educational system. By way of example, somebody my own age, which I'd like you all to think is very young, may well have gone to a special school because they wouldn't have been able to access their mainstream school, yet they could be in college with me today. So just because they present having come through the system differently does not necessarily mean that it won't work. Some also may decide to take longer, just by virtue of confidence, by virtue of accessing courses, by virtue of the fact that they just have to navigate their way through a system. So they may find themselves moving from course to course, gradually achieving incrementally higher levels until they get where they want to go. Some may step out of the system, particularly we would see this in relation to disability, whereby it might be a disability that could at times become more impactful or get a little bit worse. Things like multiple sclerosis, by way of example, things like epilepsy, diabetes, things that cause people to maybe have to stop for a while, disengage, but they can re-engage again and pick up where they left off. And sometimes people just want to do it differently, and they can be our champions or our firsts, as I like to call them. But in any case, it's a more scenic route and very often makes for a very interesting story. So what it means for us as guidance counsellors, as we engage with these learners, is that we really have to stop and think about how people are planning for the road ahead, how they're going to complete education and realise their potential, how they're going to access college, what learning they're going to engage in. Accessing college, our courses, and when I mention college, I really am talking about anything that's post-secondary, whether it's full-time, part-time, or otherwise. Not just how they're going to access college, but how they're going to advance in college. What is their story? How are they going to engage with faculty and say, this is what I need in order to be successful here? Because this is part of their planning for the road ahead. And it's not just enough to think about curriculum. They also need to think about college life, clubs and societies, internships, Erasmus, peers. And it's a big ask. But for the day that they're sitting in front of an employer being interviewed, this is their story. No employer at interview just talks to somebody about their learning and their the curriculum they were engaged in. They really do want to hear more. And the students themselves, I find, do want to experience more. There's another challenge outside of the learning environment I find for career guidance is the informal guidance, I suppose, and attitudes of others, be that they're positive or negative. There are many other professionals or practitioners who contribute to the decision-making process, and these would include, and are not exclusive to, educational psychologists, occupational therapists.
Mary?
Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you give a wrap-up for in a minute or two?
I can. Yes,
okay,
of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think really what we're finding there are the challenges, and I can make my presentation available to people afterwards, are the others that
Great.
By way of example, a learner may come in front of us and say, but somebody else told me this is what I need to do. And that can be challenging. And where do we need to consider our role with respect to that? So we need to stop and think about who are the others and whether they're professional or whether they're parents, friends, peers, etc., and how we can use them and how they can contribute to our work. I just wanted to put a little flashcard up in relation to testing, because sometimes we become a little bit caught up in the testing. Well, we need to start asking ourselves, are we accommodating? Are they fit for purpose? Or are they just a small part of the picture? And for some students with disabilities, do we need to use them at all? So really what I'm saying is that we need to think of our greatest skills as career guidance people, our listening skills, our communication skills. We need to be able to recognise the role disability plays in someone's life, both positively and negatively. And this is something that we are trained and qualified to do, but maybe we need to rethink and redesign with respect to how we're going to do that. And never underestimate the attitude of the student that's sitting in front of us. So what we're seeking to do is make guidance as accessible as it can possibly be. We're thinking about the communication, we're thinking of our changing client base, we're considering the tools and information that we're making accessible to them. And we also might need to think of even the time that we give, because some learners or students may require more time than others. We need to be planning for the future, and the future as we know it, or as we don't know it, more than likely, it's changing. Work is changing. Our client base is changing, and that is possibly our greatest challenge of all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Please remain in this webinar. For all the people who are joining the webinar, you have the possibility to put in your questions. And in the meanwhile, I will ask Mary to share their webcam with us. Then we can finally see who was presenting. I sent you a request for that.
Great.
And I will put myself in view as well.
Okay, sorry now. I have something up here. Okay.
Okay. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi there. We're here. We're both here. And all the listeners can see us now. Thank you for your presentation, Mary. It was very interesting to hear about all the possibilities there are for students with disabilities and all the opportunities you mentioned. And I'm inviting now people to share their questions with us, and I will speak them out loud to you, and then you can answer them. Let's see whose questions are already here. It's one question from Liana. Will the slides of the presentation be shared with us afterwards? Yes, we will share all the presentations we used today. And maybe a question for Mary. You're a researcher. Where can people find more information if they want to read about it?
What I'm writing. I can share some links with you where they can see it as it progresses. I'm aware that my colleague, Dr. Conor McGuckin, is also included in the webinar. But we're still at the early stages, and as it's developed, I'd be very happy to share it with you.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask if there are attendees who will still have a question, if they want to raise their hand. Then I'll make sure that I don't miss any of the questions. I see a raised hand from Cindy, but maybe it was already there. Okay. Yes. Oh, Cindy again. I will check if I can find your question, and otherwise I will give you the word, because no, I can't see the question from Cindy, so I will give the word to Cindy. Okay, Cindy, you can ask your question now. You're in the webinar.
Do you hear
Yes.
me? Oh,
Yes.
I didn't have a question. I just didn't know my hand was. But now I'm talking. I am curious about. You mentioned 5.2% of the student population has an disability, and it's growing every year. So I do not recognize it's growing every year. So I was wondering, why do you think it's growing every year?
Because, well, this is actual research that we've carried out in Ireland, and I can direct you to the data participation rates that are on the AHEAD website, www.ahead.ie. And since 93-94, when there was only a couple of hundred students, it has now risen to over 8,000 students annually. And this is students that register with a disability in our third level education system. They're full-time course students. The data is very interesting because it breaks it down according to what courses they're studying, and we also can see what types of disabilities they have. In order to get supports in college, they have to register. Now, I know similar data is actually collected in Holland as well, and I'm led to believe, I think it's about 12%. Of the student population. But what we are seeing as trends, I suppose, across Europe is that this number is rising. And two interesting trends there, just to share with you from the last 2 years, is that the greatest, when we stop and think about what types of disabilities are most on the increase, mental health disabilities are one, and ASD, autism and ASD are a second. And there is also, just to say that we are aware that there is new disabilities that are beginning to come through our second level system. So this is data, it's hard data that we can see in Ireland, and I know there's similar data in other European countries.
Okay, thank you for answering. Is this an answer for your question, Cindy?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. I muted Cindy. And I received a question from Elke. And we come back to that one later on due to the time we have left for the two other speakers. So thank you, Mary. I will close down your screen and the webcam, and I will switch over. So for the listeners, it will take a short while. Bye, Mary. Thank you very much again. And I will switch over to Karin. Hi, Karin. We can also see your presentation is already there. I would give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Jetske. Welcome all to this part of the webinar. I would like to introduce to you a guide that has been developed during the last year together with the Dutch Netherlands Youth Institute and the National Support Center, Inclusive Education, specifically for primary and secondary education, and the Dutch Expert Center for Studying with Disabilities. And it builds actually very well upon the presentation Mary has just given. So why this guide has been developed is actually through experience in the field. And also,
why this guide? There were experiences in the field about, is there an information document for students with a disability about what to expect from an interview at higher education, and also that noticed that guidance counselors in secondary education had little knowledge about this specific target group, and it would be good if they knew more. Moreover, also research shows that students with disabilities more often have a study delay, that their study progress is lower, that many students drop out in the first phase of their studies, and they are hardly aware of the facilities and possibilities and also financial measures they can make use of. So it is, of course, a big step. Mary mentioned before the difference between the social model and the medical model. In the Netherlands, this social model is used in the secondary education. So it's really about the needs of students, and the medical model is used in higher education, really going through what kind of label does the student have. Moreover, in secondary education, parents are still responsible for their children and have a leading role, whereas in higher education, students are responsible and really have to take the initiative themselves. And that also includes that secondary schools are usually a lot smaller than higher education institutions and also more proactive. So it demands a lot more of the student going to higher education to make clear their needs than in secondary education. Furthermore, terminology can also play a part. For example, a dean in higher education is the same as a care coordinator in secondary education, but you really have to know about that. So we started the process about making the guide about what are the needs. So we know from research from the expert center as well that students need to know what facilities and possibilities are offered at the higher education, and whom can I contact to make use of these facilities, and how can I request them? And also a question about how feasible is the study for me. And they don't need only a website, but they use most effective is actually personal contact. So that are their needs. So given these requests and experience in the fields and research, we set up roundtables to gain information. And from that roundtables, we discovered that students focus mainly on choosing a study. Professionals wish to collaborate more closely with professionals in higher education, so collaboration was an important one, and also the division of roles, from who's doing what. Given the core care coordinator, the dean, the mentor, the guidance practitioner, how do they share responsibilities to make sure no student is left behind? And also information in secondary education about higher education facilities. As I said before, it's really important, the personal contact, so really knowing whom to go to. But then it's really important also to note that most students search for information online. Also, given that parents are important, it's important to take them along. And it's important that students say that it's to think about opportunities and not so much about obstacles. So it's all about finding the right people and facilities, and good information can help in that. That leads to a guide, as you can see here, together with the Netherlands Youth Institute and the National Support Center and the Dutch Expert Center about disability, studying with disabilities. And it's actually divided in two parts, the guide. The first part is about what can professionals do together with students. And then it's about support with orientation, discuss the feasibility of the study they want to choose. So is this really a good study for you? What are the consequences? What do you have to take care of? What do you have to keep in mind? Encourage students to report what they need at an early stage, or really before starting their studies, they should contact already the higher education institution to make sure what they need so that it's in time arranged. And also discuss the study choice check, which is a very Dutch phenomena, so not maybe applicable to everywhere in Europe. And also make sure that information from secondary education goes to higher education, because there's already a lot of valuable information there, which can be used also in higher education. And then what can the professional do on their own? So professionals in secondary education should make sure that their knowledge of higher education is up to date, and that they have a good network and a partnership with higher education institutions. And also to improve it, they should evaluate the transition to higher education within their network. And of course, policies and making sure the existing policies are clear, it is important to be aware of that as well. So we think this is a very nice document which can help secondary education professionals to smoothen the transition for students with a disability to higher education and make sure there's a soft landing. And of course, this document is made specifically for the Netherlands. We do think there are a lot of general principles that can be useful throughout Europe and further in the world. The publication is not only available in English and Dutch, but also in English. You can find it at the website of the Dutch Expert Center for Studying with a Disability, and you will also be able to find it at the Euroguidance website. So that is in a nutshell the guide, and if there are any questions, I am of course pleased to answer them. Thank you, Jets.
Okay, thank you, Karin, for presenting. Thank you for the information you shared with us, and I will wanted to let you know that we also have a colleague from the handicap+studie here in the webinar for you answering questions. She is not visible for you, but if you send your question, she will answer it for you. You can use the question button on the right. I did not receive any yet during the webinar. It seems that people did find the raise your hand method. So if you have a question especially for Karin about this topic, please raise your hand now. I don't see any questions coming in. Okay. Thanks again, Karin, for your presentation. She's sitting next to me, so that's a bit more easily than the presentation from Ireland. And I will switch over to our third presentator for today. That will take a minute. I will switch off Karin for her view, and I will switch on Mathieu. Just a minute. So you can also see the presentator. Can you please accept, Mathieu, because you're audible, but you're not visible yet? I sent you a request.
Yes, okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, you're in.
I can start now.
Give you the floor. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to tell you something about the COSIMA project. It's a lifelong modular e-portfolio we developed. It's developed in cooperation with Dutch, German, and Flandrian partners, supported by the Erasmus+ EU program. It is especially to contribute more inclusive education for disadvantaged youth. And the heart of it is to make competences visible. The reasons for starting the project is that due to the disposition and attitude, a lot of young people do leave school without initial qualifications or certificates, have a negative self-evaluation and passive attitudes towards work, and our educational system is very keen on getting people to an initial qualification, but about 10 to 15% of our youth is not able of getting a diploma, and but they do have talents, and a lot of these talents and competences are not visible. And with this project and the e-portfolio, we try to solve this problem and give them a more possibilities to show other people what they are able to. I will tell something about the characteristics of the Cosima e-portfolio. It's more than just a portfolio with outcomes, photos, or videos. It is also possible to combine exercises, learning materials, tests. You can combine them in the portfolio and make it possible to let people do the things they need. It can be also a portfolio, but also a learning for formal and non-formal education. A very specific feature is that it is possible to have a message function and support case management and guidance from school to school if people go to another school or to a work internship or a workplace. And it has an open structure. It means that it is built for the project and for the Dutch situation, but it is also generally it are standards, and it is an open structure. You can use your own tests, standards, or validation reports. And also for other countries, it's possible to make it tailor-made on their situation. I think another feature that is really important for the inclusive education is that specific target groups and different levels can be supported. For instance, youth with a very low IQ, around about 80, they can use icons to show their parents what they've learned, what competences they've worked on in a week in a program. So it's very adjustable for specific groups. Another feature, I think it's very important. It will support personalized learning and personal ownership of the student or the learner. They can decide what is shown to other people on what they've achieved. And well, you can use the things and show them what is important for the career you're looking for or a job vacation. It also offers possibilities to look on vacancy jobs. It's all connected. Perhaps one other interesting thing is that the ICT company that developed this portfolio works without any pre-investments. They are paid by use later, so they have more risk also in investing and developing the portfolio. I think that's very interesting also for other people who want to use it. This picture shows the important role that the student is in the center, and all the other roles can be connected with him. The mentor, teachers, parents, but also the employer and internships. And this is the message function I mentioned, and it's very nice so that you can make a sort of continuous guidance and coaching so that if you are going to another school, your coach you had on your first school can also connect with the next educational level and coaches. So it supports lifelong learning. This picture, I told you, it is a very broad, a lot of features and we show some of them, and well, it's too much to say. I've said a lot of things already, I think, but important is that you can switch off, you can pick the features you need, so you can make it tailor-made to your situation and your educational or coaching program. Well, we let them add self-test careers. You can import additional systems or applications. It also a job vacancy seeker. It's available in Dutch, German, and English. I think that's some, well, features. I think you best can go to Cosima, www.cosima.eu, and you can go to, well, the intellectual output. There's a handbook, it's the portfolio. It also has an app that you can use to make photos of your exercises you've made. And we have a handbook for implementation. It contains a student guide and a teacher guide. You can find them on the cosima.eu website. The partners, I think it's nice to mention them. We have worked with the VET Graafschap College. It's a VET college in Holland. The Dutch Expertise Center for Children with Special Educational Needs are a partner in the project, and also some technical schools, VET schools in Germany, and the school of the Aloysius Stichting in Harreveld. It's well, a special needs school. We've developed the portfolio now, but we want to go further with it. We're preparing now an Erasmus Key Action 2 program with new partners, with more connection to implementing the use of the portfolio. And we are looking for partners now in regions in 4 other countries. And we want to use it in the infrastructure in combination with educational institutes, local communities, and employers, so that the possibilities of the portfolio are well used and tested in a regional situation. I think that's what I wanted to tell you. If there are questions, we're open for them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mathieu. I will look if there arrived any questions, especially for the presentation of Mathieu. No, I didn't see any questions, especially for Mathieu. I will check if anybody raised his hand. Mathieu, you're still in.
Okay. What do I have to do?
I see a raised hand from Corinne. And I didn't receive the question, so I put Corinne in now. Hi, Corinne, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
We hear you, but it's a bit soft.
Okay, I will try to speak higher. So, do you hear me better? Do you hear me now better?
Well, it's not very much audible. It's really soft, and you can also use the question. It's on the right, and you can type your question, and I will speak your question out loud.
Yes, I'm trying to find the where I can enter my question. My question was,
well, you're audible now. You can ask your question now.
Yes, if you hear me better, maybe I wanted to ask if the Cosima portfolio is also edited in other languages, in several languages, and in French.
Okay, this is a question for Mathieu. If the Cosima tools are also available in other languages.
Yes, the handbook is also available in German and English, I think. And if you want to use the portfolio, it has to be made suitable for your situation. So I think it's...
Do you mean translation?
Yes, but now I don't... I think you have to, if you want to use your own tests you use in your country, you can connect them in the portfolio, so they are visible in the environment of Cosima. So it's not always necessary to translate, but I think the interface has to be made suitable for the country of the situation you need. So yeah, I think in cooperation with the ICT company Maragin, you can make it suitable for your own situation.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Corinne, for this question. If anybody else have any question, you can raise your hands. I don't see any. Okay. Then we have one question left from Elke, and it was a question from Elke to Mary. So I will put Mary and Corinne in view, so you can have all the presentations at once. And this is also a sort of wrap up for this presentation. So because it's almost 12 o'clock, for people who want to leave, you're free to leave. Thank you for listening. We first had the presentation of Mary. It was the broad information about students with disabilities. Afterwards, we have listened to Corinne, who presented more instruments who are useful, and Mathieu was the third speaker, and he zoomed in on the use of portfolio. And I will put back all the three speakers into view for everybody who was curious to ask a last question or to hear the question from Elke. I will I will tell her question in a minute. I will just put Mary in view. Here she is.
Hello,
Hi
Mary.
again. And I will put Corinne in view. Okay, now you have the whole panel complete. I will read the question from Elke. And it was a question asked to Mary. And it says, this week I talked to someone of the Dutch Network for Transgender Persons. This is a quite small group of students. They cope with study delay because of needed operations. And with sorry for my speaking, psychological, I don't have to look at the word and I'll manage problems. Is this a group of students also in the scope of AHEAD? She's asking to Mary.
Okay, that's a great question, actually. It's not currently a group of students that we, I suppose, actively seek out. However, we have worked with them. Under the definition of a disability in our quality legislation, when somebody has engaged in surgery or, you know, has had reason, and I'm not suggesting for a second this person is ill, but the accommodations and the sort of supports they would require would be quite similar to others with a disability. We've also found that some of the issues when we engage with professionals who are working with LGBT, transgender, others on the diversity group, issues around disclosure, issues around seeking accommodations in relation to time when they need to step in, step out of study, they can be quite similar to the issues that students with disabilities experience and possibly need to be managed the same. So this is why I find it very interesting with my studies that if we stand back and look at our guidance and ask ourselves, how do we make this as accessible as we possibly can to the widest range of people from the very beginning? So those issues around disclosure, around giving people more time, allowing them to step in and step out. We have engaged with people who maybe are one gender when they start their studies and a different when they finish. How did they explain that as part of their journey, etc.? So just to even pause and think about that in relation to our guidance, our assumptions, and how we work with that student. So is it something we've worked a lot with? Not an awful lot, but it is something that we have worked with. And I have worked with that issue whereby students are transitioning into graduate placements in employment also. And employers equally would be very cognizant of their role with respect to that. Does that answer?
Okay, thank you. Well, if Elke is still in, I will give her the word right now, and we can ask her if this was an answer to her question. Elke, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
You're very far away. Yes, you're.
Okay, you might hear my son talking as well. But it was a very clear answer, yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that your answer is answered, and thank you also for having you and all the other people who are joining this webinar. We come to a final of this webinar. Thank you for listening. After closure, you will receive a questionnaire with questions for us, and we all also are very curious about what you think of the presentations for this day, and we're also curious if there are other topics you would like to hear in a next webinar. Thank you all, and hopefully see you back in another webinar. Bye bye.